Good afternoon. Today we're going to be going over more of the battles of World War I. One thing I do want you to concentrate on throughout these next few lessons is we are not so concerned about the specific elements of each battle. We're more so looking at the battles of World War I in order to frame how World War I changes warfare from here on out and the different aspects of war that come in during this time period. We also want to look at how the way that people view war has changed. If you think back, we read some different examples that showed people thought war was glorified and honorable, and then we want to see how that changes over the course of the war and why that changes. In addition, just a quick reminder that your soldiers' war journals are going to be due on Friday. So just to quickly review where we were at previously, the Battle of the Marne, the German offensive, the Schlieffen Plan, meaning a quick war in France and then being able to allocate those resources from the Western Front in France to then go over to the Eastern Front against Russia and crush Russia. That was the basic concept of the plan. We saw at the Battle of the Marne that doesn't happen. Germany makes a couple of tactical mistakes. They miss Paris and get separated a little bit, allowing the British and French troops to push them back to the Aisne River. And that's as far as Germany is going to get to Paris and winning the war in general. At the Battle of the Aisne, we started to see trench warfare beginning, and that's why we spent a couple of days on trench warfare. Moving from there, we wanted to look at how trench warfare changes the way that people are going to fight. We talked about the advent of the machine gun. So now a full frontal assault with infantrymen with rifles was going to be a lot more difficult because you have to deal with the machine gun cutting you down as you go. The Battle of the Aisne, as you look down here on this map, Battle of the Aisne is going to lead to what is known as the race to the sea. And the whole idea here is if you outflank your enemy, if you're able to get around your enemy, you're able to stop them. You're able to declare victory. If you surround them, they lose all their army, etc. The problem is your enemy is also going to be mirroring your movements. So as the French try to outflank, the Germans move up to outflank as well. And so both lines will continue to move northward, trying to get around the enemy, eventually ending at the North Sea. They can't get around each other. This will establish the basic line of fighting from here on out in the Western theater on the Western Front. And the first battle that we're going to look at is known as the Battle of Ypres, and you see that one shown right here, just barely across the French border into Belgium. The first Battle of Ypres, there are going to be a couple, lasts for about a month, and it's near Flanders in Belgium, between the French, the Belgians, the British Expeditionary Force. Remember, Britain doesn't really have a professional army yet. These are volunteers, against the Germans. And it's this idea of you're trying to outflank, and then eventually you realize, okay, we ran out of room. You want to go? Yeah, I'll go. And the outcome of this is a stalemate, which is incredibly shocking because really that's going to be 80% of the battles in World War I. Of note from this battle, the morale of the infantry changes. They realize we're losing 70% of our men per attack, and they start to refuse the orders from their commanders to engage in a full frontal assault because they know exactly what's going to happen. This battle really exhibits World War I in a nutshell. You have no man's land in between the two lines. You have shelling, the morning hate, and then you have full frontal assaults and people being cut down by machine gun fire and other things. Because of this battle, though, Germany rethinks its strategy. Erich von Falkenhayn is now the leading commander of the German troops in the West, and instead of the Schlieffen Plan, because we know we can't get a quick victory now, he moves to a plan which is called attrition. It becomes a war of attrition, meaning I'm going to make the losses so bad for my enemy that my enemy no longer wants to fight. And we see this in World War II as well. This is the way that the Japanese fought against the American troops in the Pacific from island to island. That's eventually what led to the Americans dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in order to not have to deal with that attrition any longer. But that strategy is going to play out for the rest of the war here, Germany trying to inflict as much damage as possible in the hopes that they can get the French to say, you know what, we want to be done fighting, even though nobody was completely victorious. Here we have a good look at Ypres and where it's located, but also this solid red line that goes down here, that is the line in 1914. This dotted line is the line in 1918. So you can see it's maybe 10 miles at its widest point, that it changes over the course of 4 full years. And that's really a miserable kind of existence then at that point, knowing how long that is and that you're really not going to make any progress. Other events of 1914, the Black Sea raid. This is where the Ottomans get involved. They attack Russian ports here, Russian naval ports along the Black Sea, and we'll come back to the Black Sea in a second. We also see the British blockade Germany and the Christmas truce. And there's a video in the link there that gives you a little bit of information. Basically, German troops and British troops have a temporary truce. It's not something that's official. It doesn't come down from generals or sergeants. It's the men who start singing and cross no man's land to meet each other, play a couple of games of soccer, and then the next day they're going to go right back to fighting once again. But you think about it, it puts a really psychological block on for you. Now you're not just fighting a nameless, faceless enemy. You also have to deal with it being somebody you know and met. In 1915, at the beginning, we see the first Zeppelin raid on London. 38 people die. It's not really major damage, but it's this concept of total war. No longer is it just whoever is fighting on the front, those are the soldiers and those are the people at war. Now it's anyone involved in that country. You're considered to be an enemy or an enemy soldier. And the same thing goes with unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany knows they can't match the British Navy, so they begin to use their U-boats, their underwater boats, much more often. And it's not just that they use them, but how they use them. They're not just attacking military targets. They're also going after other ships that are suspected to be helping the enemy in any way, whether that's bringing food or supplies, and that'll play a big role in a minute or two. The campaign of Gallipoli lasts for a long period of time, near constant fighting throughout. We saw the Black Sea previously. If you go back to here, here's the Black Sea. Gallipoli is down in here. Here's Istanbul. If you control the Dardanelles, where Gallipoli is located, you control access to the Black Sea. So for the Allies, Britain and France, they really like the idea of linking together with Russia and then being able to attack into Austria-Hungary from the south and eliminating the Ottoman Empire, which they viewed as the weakest part. The plan is devised by a young Winston Churchill, and it's going to fail, and so it takes him like 10 years to get back to being as popular as he was once again. It's basically trench warfare on rock, which you can imagine is really, really difficult to deal with. And it ends in a decisive Ottoman victory because not only the deaths on both sides, but because the French, British, and Australian and New Zealand troops, they leave. They're unable to hold that land, and so they eventually call it off. We'll come back to Mustafa Kemal in just a second here. But I wanted to show you the map of the area. Anzac Cove is where they land in April, especially the Australian and New Zealand troops. And you can see by the topography of the land, this is not easy land to land on. It's very rocky. It's very kind of almost mountainous. And so it makes things really difficult. They can't even build a hospital there. So if you get injured, you have to be taken by boat back to one of these ships out here in order to get medical attention. And so you can imagine the amount of death and destruction that would be caused strictly because you didn't have medical abilities there. As they're pushed out, the plan to push them out, it comes from Mustafa Kemal, who eventually becomes known as Kemal Ataturk, meaning father of the Turks. He's like their George Washington, puts together the defensive plan, fights in it, is successful, and then becomes their first leader once the Ottoman Empire falls, where we see the development of the country of Turkey. Other events of 1915, the first use of poison gas. Italy is going to trade sides. Italy jumps from the Triple Alliance over to the Triple Entente side of things. The Lusitania is sunk. This is a British passenger ship, killing over 1,200, and that includes about 128 Americans. And it's unrestricted submarine warfare. So it's sunk by a sub, it's not given really any warning, and it's destroyed by a submarine. We also see the first, the Lusitania. That's going to influence when the United States enters the war. You can imagine how excited they were that 128 businessmen and passengers were killed as opposed to soldiers. First air combat victory. We also see Germany, as a result of the Lusitania and how the U.S. reacts to it, removing unrestricted submarine warfare from their battle plan. Battle of Verdun, another one of these kind of quintessential classic World War I battles. Location is in northeastern France, right over here, and this is right on the edge of the region of Lorraine, those regions of Alsace and Lorraine that France lost to Germany and wants back. And Germany's new strategy is attrition. We want to antagonize the French to attack us where we know we're strongest. And so they want to get a more defensive position at Verdun in order to defend it. And so when the French will attack, the Germans will be able to repel it and inflict maximum damage on the French. In this battle, we see an ebb and flow leading to a stalemate. Shocking. Joseph Joffre for the French, the general, and Erich von Falkenhayn, that leader we talked about earlier, for the Germans. We see almost 1 million casualties come out of this over the course of that almost year time period. And we see this real development of no man's land, this land in between the two trench lines that you would have to run across in order to gain land if you're infantry. It's been shelled. It is completely destroyed. You'll see in this picture here, this is an image of the no man's land of Verdun in 1916, just after an artillery shell has hit. And there's nothing there. There's no forestation. It has all been deforested. It's completely destroyed by trenches and pockmarked. And if you look at it in more modern times, found this picture from 2005, you can see, yes, we're starting to gain some of that foliage back, but my goodness, look at the pockmarks from the shells that fell, and just how intense that was. You can see the sheer amount of artillery shells that were fired by this guy kind of standing amongst these piles of spent casings. The largest naval battle is the Battle of Jutland, taking place in 1916. It's off the coast of Denmark. So, basic idea, here is where the German Navy is, this pink or red region, and the British want to keep them there. They don't want them to have access to other places. They want to continue to blockade the German Navy fleet. And both sides kind of claim it as a victory. For Germany, they inflicted more damage, but for Britain, they kept them in that one little area, and so they feel that they were victorious. 250 ships total. It's going to lead to the Germans even more unrestricted submarine warfare because they realize they can't win traditionally against Britain's navy. Then we have the Battle of the Somme. This is another river in France. So we saw Paris here and the Marne River and the Aisne. Then we see moving up towards the Somme River. And very similar to the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Aisne. It's a big offensive for the French and the British. They think that they can push through the German lines and kind of end this once and for all. No, you're wrong. This is just one of those things that they have to realize the trench style of warfare and what that means for the tactics that they have to use. The Germans kind of retreat a little bit, give up some land, but ultimately it's a stalemate. This is the first time we see tanks used in battle. They weren't really used all that effectively. Of the 50 or so tanks that the British had, only about half of them make it to the front lines, and of those, a bunch of those break down too. So doesn't really mean a whole lot. We'll get more into the tanks and technology later on. Erich von Falkenhayn is removed from power. Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, the two heroes of the Battle of Tannenberg in the Eastern Theater all the way out against Russia, they take over for Germany. We see over 1 million casualties, and in fact, that's killed and wounded. The British suffer 60,000 casualties on day one alone, where they have 60,000 men killed or wounded. The sheer amount of this leads Douglas Haig, the guy who, for Britain, comes up with this plan, to be heavily, heavily criticized for what goes on there. And he will claim it as a victory. We got the Germans to retreat a little bit, but in reality, this is just a massive failure in terms of the loss of life for the British and French troops. Other events in 1916, David Lloyd George becomes Prime Minister of Great Britain. He'll play a role later on. And Grigory Rasputin is assassinated in Russia. He is an advisor, kind of a priest, to the Tsarina, the wife of Tsar Nicholas II, Alexandra. And he is assassinated on the 29th. We'll get to his story, too. It's a really cool one. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Make sure that you're filling in your notes, and we'll complete World War I with tomorrow's lecture. Have a great day.